AQ's Blog and Grill.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to AQ's Blog and Grill. We're really excited to have on our podcast today Michael Brenner. Now, I'm going to do a quick introduction of Michael. It'll embarrass him because, well, maybe not. I think you actually wrote this yourself. But Michael Brenner has been recognized as a Forbes top CMO influencer, a top business keynote speaker by the Huffington Post, and a top motivational speaker by Entrepreneur Magazine. Now, I've known Michael for a while, and yes, he qualifies for all of those descriptions. Now, Michael is CEO of Marketing Insider Group. We're going to find out a little bit more about that in our broadcast, where he has worked with more than 75 brands in building effective content marketing and employee activism or activation programs. He's a sought-after speaker and co-author of 2 other books. He's held 50 different jobs, and that's kind of fascinating. I think the real number is 53.
That's right.
53 jobs, my goodness. And to starting his company, and now shares his life-changing and career-changing, enhancing secrets. So this is what we're going to talk about, because Michael has a new book out, and I really, really like it. And the title itself is pretty provocative. It's Mean People Suck. How Empathy Leads to Bigger Profits and a Better Life. Please welcome Michael Brenner. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Alan, thanks so much for that amazing introduction that your team must have culled through the internet to find those embarrassing stats.
A lot of hard work, and it happens to be on the back cover of your new book. So,
it sounded amazing.
Everybody's a winner. Everybody's a winner. So I love the book because you're talking about empathy. Mm-hmm. And I always think it's a good idea if we as people take our vitamin E every day, and of course that E stands for empathy. I think it makes us better people, makes us better companies, better friends and family. And so I thank you for writing this book.
Thanks.
Why did you write it? What was the motivation? Was there a particular aha moment, or is it just something you've been thinking about for a while?
Yeah, it was the moment actually happened. I had given a speech a couple of years ago, and someone, a very nice woman afterwards asked me, I'm surprised that sort of an executive like you could be so nice. And I was really, at first I was, kind of almost embarrassed at the compliment. But then I sort of I was like, wow, I never really thought of myself as an executive. and she was like, I'd love to know more about how you've achieved success. And I was like, well, that's really flattering, but I really don't feel like I've achieved, any success. And so it just kind of got me to thinking like, well, where have I come from? And, believe it or not, I aside from updating my LinkedIn profile, never really went and looked back and decided, I was like, wait a second. So I had, 7 jobs, 7 different titles at my first job. I had, 20 different jobs before I even went to college. I had 3 while I was in university, and then I had the 7, and then I had 3, and then I had 6, and I just started adding them all up. I'm like, that's a lot of jobs. And so that's where it started. And as I was doing that, I was like counting, miserable, hated that guy, hated that company, loved that job, but didn't like the people, boy, the clients were really bad in this one. And I was just like, wow, and then I started talking to other people about it. And everybody's miserable in their job at some point, everyone. And when I looked at the times when I was really happy, I found that it was generally, where there was a mentor who took what felt like extraordinary effort to sort of help me, right. Or it was a company that just seemed to be, I was proud to work for, or it was maybe none of those things existed, but there were some customers who just really appreciated the work that I did. And so it just started me, thinking, well, this just seems like such a simple thing that, if we have a little bit of empathy for people, that we can, sort of not be miserable. And then I did, I saw the research. I remember, Jim Stingle's book, Grow, and, a lot of other inspirations that I mentioned in the book. The service profit chain was probably the first inspiration,
right?
Where this counterintuitive notion of companies with a purpose, a higher purpose, companies with empathy, managers that have empathy, tend to actually deliver better results.
Mm.
And so I just felt like, yeah, be nice or have empathy is a pretty boring book title. um, but everybody's kind of miserable in their job at some point, and it's this counterintuitive notion that having some empathy can really create better business results. And that's when I so that was the process, I guess, if you will. It was the moment and then the process that got me to thinking about the book.
Excellent. Thank you. And, you in the book, you mention the new CEO of Microsoft
Mhm.
doing some re-architecture on their
Mhm.
mission statement and having it be less about the business and the business results and reframing it more in terms of what Microsoft can do to make the world a better place
Mhm.
for people.
Mhm.
And I don't think you can argue with the results that he's piling up.
No, year after year, he's been named a top 5 CEO, and I make the caveat in the book. I actually have a lot of friends that work at Microsoft, and I'm always waiting for that sort of internet troll who's going to say, "Well, I had a boss at Microsoft and he was a jerk," or
Yeah.
even Satya Nadella, the CEO at Microsoft, says and admits that there are still issues in their culture.
Sure.
But he has put programs in place. He has to try to address diversity and inclusion and leaders who are respected by their teams, not the other way around. So he's making an effort, and I really applaud that. That effort has produced an exponential stock price increase, and so you
Yes.
can't argue with that. And in the end, I say no company is going to be perfect with that many employees. But wouldn't you rather, if you had to choose between two, wouldn't you rather work for the CEO who at least says that they're putting empathy at the center of the company versus the one who might say we're a performance driven company if you're not ready to show up and fight with every muscle to an ounce of energy to kill your opponent? We all have a choice to make, and I would choose I think the former.
Yeah. You go on in that chapter and the next one to talk about champion leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and you delve into the story of Lego,
Mm-hmm.
and again how they maybe had become a performance based company. How many kits can we sell? How much money can we make
Mm-hmm.
per kit? And yet, some guy emerged who said, "Not sure that's why we're here."
Yeah.
And how did that turn Lego around?
Well, it was almost overnight, and what happened was it was kind of I've always kind of respected well-intentioned people that could speak truth to power. I've always tried to model that in some way, despite my my being a big scaredy cat most of the time. But and there's also a foolish way to do that. But yeah, Jurgen at Lego was really impressive in that he was a young guy under 40, I think, at the time. He'd only been at Lego less than a year.
Wow.
Was had a certain pedigree. He was obviously a smart guy, came from McKinsey, but he essentially walked into the board and said, you're going to go broke. We're losing X millions of dollars a day. We've got too many product lines. We've got distribution problems. We've got employee morale problems. And he just laid it all out. And he basically just said, if you don't change this family run business that feels like a community, is going out of business. And he even talks about, and I had a similar moment. I know you read the book that I shared, where he was sat in the parking lot and called his wife and said, I think I might be fired. And they did the opposite. And I tell the story in the book about how the hero of the story is the board, not him, not
Right.
Jurgen. The hero of the story is the board and the family member CEO who said, you know what? Not only are you right, you're the one to lead us out of this change. And the Lego movie came out and they reduced
Yes.
their lines and they focused on understanding how girls play and creating toys specifically to just different, I think, different populations, largely through empathy. They I recount how they sent their product engineers to go live with families to watch how kids play.
Right.
And so it's really just a great story, I think, of both of the ones you just mentioned are great stories of how CEOs can change culture when they want to. But the majority of the book focuses on what do you do when you're not the CEO.
Yes. So you gave us some great case examples throughout the book of um, whether they be managers, whether they be VPs of marketing or CEOs who just can't let go
Hmm.
of their own prejudices, and sometimes it turns out to be the idea of the week or idea of the month that they're committed to after they come home from a conference,
Hmm.
and will direct you to as part of the marketing team or the communications team. Okay, we're going to do this now. And I think you used the example of Instagram, which wasn't appropriate uh, for that company or that product line, but the CEO was sure it was going to work.
Hmm.
So you point out that sometimes you have to say no.
Hmm. Yeah.
So for our listeners who are in that kind of middle manager position, what kind of advice would you give them to say no and keep their jobs?
Yeah, well, and I talk about in the setup to what I call the pushback.
Yeah.
I talk about the illusion point. The illusion point is when a manager who thinks they know better tells their team to go do something.
Yes.
The team goes and does it, and it doesn't work. And if you could rewind time and ask the team probably knew it wasn't going to work. And I call that the illusion point because the manager just thinks he's doing or she's doing his or her job by saying, "I'm telling my team what to do." It's interesting in that almost all of the CEOs I talked to before writing the book, when I asked them what is your biggest challenge, they said, "I just wish my team would do what I tell them to do." And yet there was one. Who said, "I wish I could build a team that felt empowered to do the right thing." And that's this whole idea of champion leadership. And so the illusion point is when managers who think they know best ask their team what to do. The team knows it won't work and they do it anyway. It's an illusion because it's the tip of the iceberg, right? We only
Right.
see the requests. We don't see the effort, the frustration, the lack of results. And that's sort of the illusion point. In order to avoid the illusion point, I introduced this concept of the pushback. And there's a great example from Capgemini, where the CEO of Capgemini had asked a relatively lower level marketing person to sponsor a golfer for tens of millions of dollars. And sure, the marketing team would have loved that $20 million budget, and the sales team would have loved sitting on the fancy booth meeting Tiger Woods, and all of those things. But this individual, she knew that it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to drive sales. It wasn't going to increase their awareness. And so she pushed back in a very simple way. She did some research and she said, "Look, I looked at our client base and I surveyed them, and only 15% care about golf at all.
Right.
In fact, only 8% are passionate about golf. The other 7% just sort of watch it. Us sponsoring a golfer isn't going to move the needle in 85% of our audience. And even if it does move the needle in that 15%, it's probably only going to move it a little bit for the 8 that are really passionate if they happen to see our logo."
Right.
And oh, by the way, we can't measure those results either. Maybe we can bring prospects to the fancy booth at the golf tournaments, but we probably would have closed those people anyway. So she pushed back and she had a counter proposal. Her proposal was, hey, for 0.1% of the cost of that golf sponsorship, I think we can create customer focused content and activate our experts to share their thought leadership. And, they created this platform that was only intended to kind of increase awareness, and it ended up delivering $1 million in new sales. They doubled down in the second year and found $24 million in sales.
Wow.
From 0.1, 0.2% of the cost of what would have been the illusion, right? The illusion of success with putting a logo on a golfer's hat. It's just a great example. So what she did was she looked at the customers and she asked, what's in it for them, for us to do the thing that you're asking me to do?
Right.
Not a lot is the answer. What's
Yeah.
the ultimate goal? And I think I know a way that we can achieve that goal. That's essentially the pushback. You use a little bit of customer insight, you clarify what the objective is, and you use your expertise and experience to propose a way to achieve that goal in a measurable way. That's the pushback.
Yeah, terrific example. And for the folks that are listening, and I know you're gonna want to pick up this book, Mean People Suck, by Michael Brenner. He's got a great chart. There's a diagram in the book that shows that illusion point very effectively. I'm going to photocopy it or scan it and just tack it up beside my workstation here because it's a good reminder. Now, when you're talking about people or organizations or bosses or other employees that suck, you kind of look for, Michael, in the book, okay, how are we going to solve this? How are we
Mhm.
going to make it better? And one of the things that you suggest, which I think is brilliant, is a new organizational model. So, in other words, you point out that maybe the org chart that is the traditional one that's kind of shaped like a triangle or a pyramid.
Mhm.
Um, you have to understand that they used to bury people in those pyramids. So those org charts are kind of like this big tomb.
Mhm.
And you go to the circular
Mhm.
thing. Now, how does that work? And what's the main point of organizing in terms of a circle as opposed to the triangle?
Well, and it's a very simple visual way to try to suggest an answer to a very complex problem. And in fact, in showing some empathy and kindness, I'd love to offer a free PDF if you can post it somewhere
Sure.
of all of the images in the book. It's my sort of free audiobook companion guide
Great.
that has these images that the illusion point and the org chart and the bullseye is what I
Perfect.
call
Thank
it.
you. Yeah.
So I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
But so the reason it's complex is, first of all, it reverses the notion that a manager is supposed to lead his or her team. It reverses that because managers are only supposed to make sure that the right resources are in the right place to get a job done. Command and control hierarchies existed in the military where it was a matter of life or death if the soldiers moved to point A or not. And we're not solving life or death situations in most of the organizations out
Right.
there. And also the leaders in a hierarchical command and control structure, the assumption is that they have better visibility to what works and where the soldiers should go, so to speak.
Mhm.
But in today's world, where customer experience is so important, it's actually frontline employees who know best
Right.
what customers are asking. It's frontline employees and the immediate second layer of support, back office employees who know best how to answer the questions that customers are asking. And so this gets back to the service profit chain, which is that happy, engaged employees create happy and loyal customers,
Right.
and that makes managers and stakeholders and shareholders very happy.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it reverses the command and control structure. So that's one. That's
Mhm.
one very, very difficult thing. The second thing is it, and this is actually a very simple way to answer this challenge. If we asked what's in it for the customer in everything that we do, which is really the ultimate outcome of a bullseye or customer centric organization,
Right.
we wouldn't do things that don't serve the customer. We wouldn't put logos on golfers. We would create content that serves and educates our customers.
Right.
We would put programs in place that make our employees happy. We would put programs in place that allow our customers to refer other customers because that's what works. Those are we would promote and hire managers who support their teams. We would fire managers that berate and belittle their teams. So when we ask what's in it for the customer, that's the ultimate outcome of a bullseye or customer-centric org model. Again, a very complex. I'm not an organizational design. I don't have a PhD in it, but I was shocked to find that there really were no, at least not that I could find, really no alternatives to the org chart out in the literature that I looked at.
Yeah. Oh well, it's an amazing thing, and this higher respect for the customer can only be it can only add traction to an organization if you organize around that customer,
Yeah.
as opposed to the silos of a corporation.
Mhm.
You're saying, well, everything we're going to do is going to make the customer's experience better, and it will allow us then to increase our profits and increase our success, which can then be shared amongst the team or the employees and the stakeholders. Um, and I think what we learned from this last 20 years of branding was that the brand really isn't authentic unless your team at the company or the producer believes in something.
Hmm.
If they're just in it to sell something, um, that's not going to last very long.
Hmm.
And you and I are chronologically mature enough uh, to remember the acronym USP,
Hmm.
unique selling proposition. But that doesn't work anymore.
Hmm.
It's not about selling, it's about buying.
Hmm.
How do we make it better,
Hmm.
best, easier for the customer to buy from us as opposed to their other choices, which
Yeah.
are pretty
Yeah.
wide. So I really enjoyed those chapters on an organizational re-architecture, not re-engineering.
Hmm.
I think re-engineering is you just try to fix stuff that's broken.
Hmm.
What you're proposing is let's start over.
Yeah, and I'm also again trying to be conscious of the lower level employee, and I've gotten this question like, hey, I live in a traditional organizational culture.
Hmm.
How am I, at the account level, manager level,
Hmm.
not a director, not a VP. How am I going to change the organization? And my answer is you don't need to. Just start to push back in your own little organization.
Hmm.
Start to connect and collaborate with your colleagues and teams in the little circle of influence that you do have.
Right.
And slowly, I believe that you can at least, at the very minimum, create a work environment that doesn't completely suck. Let's set the bar low. Let's try to work in a place that doesn't suck. Let's
Yeah.
just start there,
Yeah.
and hopefully it gets better from there.
It will get better. You know what? I think the graduates I'm teaching at a university, and my graduates are not looking for the old school. They are looking for something that's better,
Hmm.
and being better and not being a boss,
Hmm.
being a leader as opposed to a boss is something that they aspire to.
Yeah.
And this cultural shift is bang on
Hmm.
with that. So in the book, you point out that we've been focused for the last little while on customer experience or brand experience, and that empathy itself could be seen as the main component of customer experience. Is that true?
Well, yeah, I mean, it basically comes down to you can't provide a great experience for customers if you don't care about them.
Mm,
It's kind of like you can't fake your way to caring. Um,
right.
and and empathy, like I could have written a book about kindness, and I do think kindness is a big part of it. But kindness is an outcome, I think, from really truly understanding what other people care
Mm,
about,
right.
knowing what it feels like to be, that's the other thing I talk about, like marketing myopia. Marketers walk into buildings and create ads that they themselves would hate as consumers.
Mm,
That's exactly the kind of ridiculous world that I think we live in sometimes.
yeah.
But if we created programs that we ourselves would love or enjoy or be helped by, it would change the way that we create
Mhm.
experiences for customers. So yeah, I do think empathy is the key.
Yeah. There's a controversy right now about the Peloton um, exercise bike thing, and the misstep or the misstep that the brand Peloton might have made
Mm.
in picturing the characters the way they did. Um, what do you think about that? Did that message suck? Did they not respect or really pay attention to some insight on the target groups?
Yeah, it's one of those things. So, and my wife and I are both pretty woke, if you will. I think we're
Yes.
pretty sensitive to those kinds of cultural norms that are increasing in sensitivity a
Hmm.
bit. Both of us didn't see that commercial at the first viewing in that way, but
Right.
as soon as we saw the Twitter sort of controversy, and then the media that pursued
Yeah.
from that, um, both were like, oh yeah, it does kind of from that perspective look like and so I guess it just makes me wonder, did they show it to anyone? outside of their boardroom and marketing team and agency. Were there any women involved? Because I think women were, maybe the ones to take a little bit of offense. And I think, again, I completely, I'm not saying in any way that there was an overreaction, because I don't think it was. I do look at the commercial and think, it probably shouldn't have been made and released. If any group of 100 people had seen it, somebody in that group would have said, it kind of looks like the paternalistic a-hole husband is telling his 116-year-old wife she needs to lose weight, the beautiful model that she is, and then she has to videotape herself proving to him that it's from that when somebody points it out. So anyway, it just goes back to, I think, how much customer insight really went into the production of
and then the understanding of that insight. They might have gathered it, but maybe they didn't spend enough time interpreting it. And I'm very much like your experience. I saw it the first time and I didn't pay any attention to it. Then I started to hear and then I went back and I paid more attention and I went, ooh, okay, maybe this is a little off culture. And then when they lose so much stock value, company equity, yike. That's a real reaction right there. So Michael,
I think the thing I was most disappointed about, not to go too deep on this, but their response was, we were misunderstood. And my initial reaction would have been, you know what, we didn't see it that way, we didn't intend it that way, but we're sorry if it came off that way. It wouldn't take long. You don't need a PR consultant to tell you that was a better way to react than you just misunderstood us.
Absolutely. And then what did you think of the response from the gin company?
That was awesome. That was awesome.
Wasn't that great?
Yeah.
I think there's a future in this business for communications when you see that happen, or when they had the blackout at the Super Bowl, the last time the 49ers were in it, where somebody just went, holy smokes, I have permission to do this. And they showed the dunking of the, the cookie and the black. It was just brilliant. And as you say, in any sort of organizational culture, the people have to feel safe and empowered to push back, as long as they have the alternative ready. Hey, boss, I know you're a big Phil Mickelson fan, but our customers really aren't. And maybe we could rechannel the money here and increase sales. And as long as there's a win-win, and win for the employee, a win for the boss, and a win for the customer, that may turn out well. So, just closing up. What kind of advice would you give us, your readers and your listeners, to being better at not sucking? How do we improve our non-suckage?
That's definitely a word. I think it really comes down to asking this question. So in keynotes in leading up to the book, while I was writing it, I tried to introduce a hashtag WFT. Or WIFT, what's in it for the customer. And what I found was that there's 3 C's. There's the customer, there's your colleagues, and there's the company. And I think most companies think, I'm the company, we tell our employees what to do, and that creates value for customers. It's the opposite. And so what's interesting about putting customers at the center is that you realize you need your employees to be engaged to deliver on that promise. And so the real secret in this book, and Gallup has been, covering employee engagement for years. They celebrated that it went from 32 to 34% employees engaged. 1 in 7 employees are stealing computers, pens, and taking time off when they're not really sick. And so it's a crisis of empathy and engagement for employees. My advice to companies and to individuals out there, whether you're a leader or just an individual contributor, is to make connections with your colleagues. to try to build engagement and trust across your team, um, with the common goal of serving the customer. And when a manager or a boss that thinks they know better gets in the way, learn this art of the pushback.
Right.
Learn the art of. I spend 2 chapters on storytelling, one on selling the story and the other on telling the story. Learn how to pitch a business case on why change needs to happen. It's probably the most taught skill, I think, in the business world and in higher education, is how do individual people present a business case of change to people who are above them in the hierarchy. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So that's my sort of, I don't know if that was one piece of advice, but basically make connections with your team, with your fellow colleagues, around that common purpose of serving customers, and learn how to present a business case.
There we go. I think that is excellent advice that really can connect with people, and it's something they can start using today.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. So if we want to know more about Michael Brenner, and who doesn't, I would go to meanpeoplesuck.com.
Yeah.
And I would also go to Michael's LinkedIn page, which is excellent because Michael posts 2 to 4 times a day.
Yeah.
And all of those posts are coming from either Marketing Insider, which is his organization, or he's connecting to something relevant from Fast Company or HBR or Strategy. He's worth his weight in gold for us who want to keep learning. And that's the other thing in this book that it's emphasized. It's keep learning. And you'll get better. We'll get better as we do that, and use the kindness rule. Think and feel like the customer, and you'll be more successful. So thank you, Michael. It's been great chatting to you again.
Yeah.
And people go out and buy this book. Mean People Suck. It's a great title, and I'm sure it's getting a lot of attention there. I got mine. Actually, I bought a hard copy because it's things I can make notes on. But I also bought the Kindle version, which makes it easy for me to highlight. So if people are in my group, they can see some important things that at least I thought were important. And there's a lot of highlighting on this book by Michael Brenner. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, we'll do it again. And thanks everybody for listening in to the AQ's Blog and Grow podcast. Talk to you later.
AQ's Blog and Grill.